Hey everyone, welcome to the Fundamental Escape podcast. This is another installment of the Belief series, and I'm here today with yet another atheist. They seem to be aplenty on the internet. So, Mark Ejidi, how are you?
Not too bad. How you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for taking the time to talk to a deluded theist like myself.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem.
So my opening question would be, I suppose, quite logical. How does it feel to be intellectually superior to all of us crazy people who believe in fairy tales?
You know, it's a burden that you people will never understand. Now, yeah, to be completely honest with you, there is this kind of attitude among atheists that, oh well, a believer can never be, you know, I guess, if you want to use intellectually superior, and we come off that way sometimes, I think that might be more of a
Smug,
side
to
effect.
be honest.
Although there are some people who, I think, regardless of the fact if they're a believer or non-believer, that's just their personality.
Yeah, some people are just assholes.
There are people who are born assholes, and it should be, in my opinion, recognized as a disability, and we should devote resources to coming up with a treatment.
I like
Myself
your-
included. I will be the first to admit that I try to go through, day-to-day life and be kind and polite, but there are times, and for me, it's probably easier than most people where,
Yeah.
my asshole switch just gets flipped.
Yeah, let's get all the fundamental questions out of the way. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
as an atheist, where do you get your morals from?
So this is hysterical because number one, this is not out of left field, and I kind of have a feeling that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, your question there.
Of course, I'm taking the piss.
But I went on. There's a Facebook group that I'm a member of for another podcast, and it's like a members only kind of deal where they, like, because they're worried about some people being outed as atheists who aren't ready to make that statement in public.
Yeah.
So they vet their members, and I said, hey guys, I've been doing this thing on Periscope. This guy, Mark found me, asked me to come on a podcast. I have absolutely zero credibility as any atheist, source in the community. I'm just some asshole on Periscope that gets bored at work, And I said, hey, this guy's I'm not sure. I mean, he seems to be somewhat religious, but I don't know what his beliefs are. Anything I should be prepared for. And the first thing that popped up in that feed was, be prepared for the where do you get your morals question. And I think, it's funny, but there are people that just cannot fathom how you could be a moral or a decent person without a religion.
I think you're deflecting the question, to be honest.
Oh, you want me to actually answer the question?
Just being a dick. Oh dear. Oh dear. Yeah. No. Well, I mean, if we go into this hypothetical conversation, and I am completely look, there's probably going to be people that think I'm seriously asking you that. I sort of wonder. I mean, how do I say this? Joking aside, if we do kind of take the premise that everything is just a cosmic happenstance and there's no real reason other than sort of what we make of it. Where do we get anything from, really? Like, where do we... I know that's a hugely vague question, but where do we find meaning, in your opinion?
Well, so here's the way I look at it. And I kind of had... I would say I spent more time in my 30 years on this earth as an atheist than I did a believer.
Okay.
And
Did you grow up a religious person?
I grew up Catholic. I mean,
Oh, right.
Catholic school, Catholic, I was an altar boy, like, back before it was, altar server, because, even female altar boys were altar boys back then. But,
Yeah.
so I grew up in the Catholic faith. And I don't want to say I wasn't active long because, in the town I grew up in, it was a very small community. And you were pretty much identified, or you pretty much associated with your religious groups, your ethnic groups, or like your family lines if those happen to cross boundaries. I don't want to make it sound like there was like segregation in the city and everything was backwards, but this was like an old Pennsylvania steel mill town. A bunch of working class families and stuff like that. So like there were the Italian section and the Polish section, and on and on. And, each section kind of had their own respective churches. So I guess the point I'm getting at is, well, I really don't have a point, but just kind of rambling.
I was wondering where you were going there.
So I grew up around Catholics, and I was kind of
Yeah.
born into Catholicism and, went to Catholic school and all that. But
So-
even as a kid, I never really bought it.
Yeah, so you never. That was going to be my next question. Was did you ever really believe it? But you kind of just sort of answered that, I suppose. In your opinion, why do you think so many people are drawn to the ideas of religious belief?
Looking back, at least in my life and my experiences, and friends that I used to have when I was a kid and back in that community, I think a lot of them, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that they learned young.
Yeah, so
and
indoctrination.
I mean, I kind of think that's a loaded word.
Well, no, I would completely go with you on that, though.
But yeah, absolutely. They were indoctrinated
Let's
into
not
it.
mince
There are certain
words.
things you learn as a child or very young that I personally believe that you learn them early, and you learn them before you can learn to critically think about some things.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of accepted without question.
Oh, absolutely. And I like to confuse atheists when they always ask me, "Oh, why do you believe in God?" I'm like, "Well, because I was indoctrinated to."
Yeah.
I don't.
mean,
And it's funny because I don't really know how not to believe in God. I wouldn't even know what that looks like.
I kind of see, it's kind of the whole argument that, when the gay marriage thing was in full force in America, like, I would ask my friends who were religious and fundamentalist, hey, when did you realize you were straight, man? Like,
I love that question. I love that.
and it's kind of exactly the same thing. I mean, it's
Such
like when it comes to the trans issue in this
such
country,
a douche question.
like I appreciate the struggle that trans people have, but I have a hard time identifying as an ally with them because I just can't even comprehend what
Yeah.
that life is like. I mean, and I'm not
Man,
trying
like,
to minimize their
that's-
struggle. I'm just saying, like, I'm going to be the kind of guy that's going to go out there and say something to defend them, but make an ass out of myself because I really have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And
and,
it's kind
I
of-
honestly, Mark, I really value your honesty there. I think that's incredible. And I know you did listen to my conversation with Milo Yiannopoulos, and I was quite keen to get some feedback on that because we did discuss some of these ideas of, and I was very honest with him about how I sort of found myself falling into these liberal ideologies. Where I was like, oh, of course, to be a kind person, I have to be pro-gay marriage and pro-this and whatever and anti-this and, And he really made me rethink a lot of that, quite honestly.
I think where a lot of people make the mistake is kind of exactly what you just said, the liberal ideology. In my mind, I mean, and I can't speak to what it's like, in New Zealand for you, but looking at the U.S., you have your conservative and your liberal party, regardless of whether one is actually conservative or actually liberal, that's the title that they go by.
Yeah.
And the liberals will say, well, we're all about people doing what they want to do and, like liberal application of freedom.
It's really not in practice, though.
But if you flip to the conservative side, they're like, we're about a conservative government that conserves the freedom of Americans to do whatever they want to do. And it's really not in practice. So,
Yeah, that's
the
interesting.
term
I think
liberal
that's an
ideology
interesting
to me is
space.
almost meaningless because it's just something that they're, in my opinion, when I hear that word, to me, that's just please, please, please vote for me. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the actual social validity of any of the arguments.
Yeah. So you see, this is interesting because I grew up in a religious bubble. Theology was my world, not politics. So it's interesting to me to get into this space because, so essentially what I just heard you say, like I basically just reflected the idea that, liberal, I was about to say liberal theology, liberal ideology. See, that's how much ingrained it is. Liberal ideology is not in practice what it claims to be. And what I heard you essentially say was kind of the same thing in regards to conservatives.
That's kind of my opinion. And basically,
You're wrong.
this is what
You're
it comes
wrong,
down
okay?
to.
You're just wrong.
Here's what it comes down to in my mind. There is nothing uniquely liberal or conservative about the idea of letting a person find their own path in life.
Wow.
That's a human idea.
Can I just stop and say that's profound?
I've never been accused of that before.
That is very profound, like what you just said. Can you say that again, by the way?
Probably not, but
no, I think what you said was. I think what you said. Let me try and articulate this because I'm pretty good at recalling things. What you said was, there's nothing inherently liberal or conservative about people finding their own path.
Well, about allowing people
to find. Yeah,
I think that's the big issue in this.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
that's going.
I mean, if you want to say you're pro gay marriage, you're pro any of these other social issues or anti whatever. And the cause that you're supporting in one way or another ultimately ends at more freedom for the individual.
Yeah.
It is disingenuous for you to claim that that is the idea of, let's say, the liberal camp or the conservative camp.
Right.
I get this question all the time, especially when I go on Periscope, is, like, ask an atheist anything, which, to clarify for all my atheist friends who may be listening to this, a couple of them said, hey, you know what, we appreciate you being an out atheist and willing to talk and,
well,
explain our position.
You're thinking atheists aren't willing to talk? Aren't they all willing to talk?
Well, we can get into that in another stance, but my basic point was, I appreciate the kind words, guys, but realistically, you're making me out to be this kind of like, guy interested in public affairs. I was just sitting at work, bored off my ass. And I downloaded Periscope. I mean, and that took me wherever it takes me. But, when you want to get to these issues about, like pro-gay rights and stuff like that, I think at the end of the day, regardless of what your personal belief is about whether homosexuality is wrong or natural or a choice or acceptable, I think you also need to accept the fact that to live in a society where there are multiple groups of people, I mean, whatever you want to call those populations, religious, ethnicity, sexuality, whatever, you kind of have to accept the fact that there are going to be people around you that do things you don't like. And at the end of the day, it's more important in my mind for you to be a functioning member of a society than it is for you to make sure everybody knows how you feel about homosexuals.
Yeah, well, this is the point, isn't it? And this is something that really gets on my nerves, is this, and I suppose it's been half the reason, and I certainly don't want to make this podcast all about Milo because he gets enough attention, but he certainly does. And but it's coming across the likes of him and even Gavin McInnes as well. It's this. Yeah, it's sort of this pushback to this liberal ideology that, wants to tell you that if you don't fit this prescripted narrative that you're racist, sexist, and homophobic, and you're a jerk, essentially. And I just don't think it's true.
Well, and I think to a certain extent, I'm torn on that. I'm really torn on that position because part of me thinks you're trying to obtain followers by coercion. You're going to believe in this, which we call the liberal side.
Oh, you mean you struggle with that narrative?
Well, I kind of see both sides of it, if you want to put it that way. Like, I kind of, if you don't agree with me, you're a racist, because it's very easy to call somebody a racist and ruin their career and not have to support that statement.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So, was it Ben Affleck on Bill Maher basically calling Sam Harris a racist,
and if you listen to what Sam says after the fact about that statement, it makes perfect sense. If you just calm down and listen to what, the words that he actually uses as opposed to reacting with emotion. And I don't think people always do it purposely. I think maybe some people, they get a little bit emotional because these issues have to deal with how people live their lives and to a certain extent how they're prevented from living their lives. And it's hard to not get emotional about that. Yeah. But I think there are some people who purposely use that as some form of coercion. Follow my side, or I'm going to apply this label to you. Yeah. It's just like, Mark, do you have a sister?
I have a stepsister.
You have you have a sister, and she's a slut.
Oh, really? That's really horrible.
So here's the thing.
Why would you say that, Mark? Come on.
Because now I put it out into the world, and it's your job to counter that argument.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, I think, the same tactic that some of these people use.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what Milo sort of said to me. He goes, they set this up for you because they want you to fail.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that coin, and again, I don't know about Milo's, I don't even know where he actually, like, where he's from. Is he?
He's UK.
UK, okay. And I don't know what it's like in New Zealand other than, my unsuccessfully retired friend that just moved out there.
Land of the hobbits.
Right? There are some issues where, if you identify with the conservative side on some of these topics, I don't want to say that the conservative party is misogynistic, racist, homophobic. I mean, I think there is
I think you do want to say that.
There's a small vocal minority that have adopted policies that are like that, or could very strongly be construed like that, and they do a poor job of articulating a defense.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying I agree with them, because I disagree with a lot of what the conservative right in this country is trying to do.
Well, I mean, since we are diving into these taboo subjects, what's your take on racism? I mean, do you think it's possible to be racist against white people?
I'm going to get kicked out of my atheist group for this. I think it is.
Yeah, of course it is. Why would that be controversial?
I agree. There's a great story that, and again, it's a personal anecdote, so it means nothing in the whole scheme of things. But back east, in the town of Pennsylvania that I'm from, my dad was a police officer in that town. And a very, very small town. So they actually used like part-time employees as well as full-time cops.
Yeah.
So it was not uncommon for a part-time cop in one city to work part-time in another city, to support their family. So this guy, he was a white guy. He applied for a job, and I think it was through an air, like the city manager who turned him down should have never said this, but they said basically like, yeah, you know what, we wanted to hire you. You had more experience. You were more qualified, but we had a minority candidate that applied, and we really need to up our minority numbers. In retrospect, the city manager probably should have said, hey, we just didn't pick you, and not given a reason, but whatever. Yeah. So he went and he contacted a union, like an FOP, which is a union for law enforcement, essentially, one of their attorneys, who then, believe it or not, referred this over to a local ACLU attorney. Wow. Who ACLU is known for being very, very left-wing on some of the issues that they deal with. But it's the American Civil Liberties Union, for those that are not familiar. And they deal a lot with civil rights issues. So this attorney was consulting with the guy, and this guy who was turned down for the job said, this is just garbage. This is just a perfect example of reverse racism. And the attorney, who happened to be black, stopped him in his sentence and said, no, stop right there. You're absolutely wrong. And that guy goes, well, what are you talking about? That's exactly what this is.
There's no such thing as reverse racism.
And she goes, no, there is no reverse racism. This is just straight up racism. Yeah. It doesn't matter which side it's against. It's just straight up racism.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not, that's an argument for affirmative action and hiring practices, and an issue that I am not qualified to speak on in any way, shape, or form. But to answer your question, yes, it is possible to be racist against whites. I think a lot of people who are white maybe jump the gun a little bit when they're going to that claim.
Well, you got Milo now starting a scholarship fund for white men only.
That is an interesting concept, and I would like to see how that turns out, because as a guy who had to take out student loans and pay for his own school, because I wasn't eligible for a lot of scholarships, just because of my life circumstance, not because of like race or anything like that.
Yeah.
That's not a statement with venom, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I just happen to not be eligible. I looked into a lot of scholarships that were, minority-based scholarships. And, if you read the fine print, it might say for African-American students, but they said, really anybody that applies is eligible for the scholarship.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that is a legal fine print kind of thing, or how much of that is a legitimate, they would actually give it to somebody that wasn't, who they decided to do. Now, that all being said, maybe there is a vested interest, and this is a social issue that, again, in my life experience, I will be the first to admit that I might have feelings about the topic, but I'm not qualified to be kind of the arbitrator as to whether or not this is, racist.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there is historically a pattern where minorities were denied opportunities to go to school through a bunch of different mechanisms. Not all of them were like the white man actively oppressing, but a fair amount of them back in the day were. So, is it proper to allow them to have their own scholarships? Is it acceptable? In my mind, yeah, it is acceptable to
Yeah,
do.
well, why not?
And especially if it's private money. If it's private money, I don't give a shit.
Exactly. And that's the thing, isn't it? These kind of, ideas sort of, people want to police language and police, people's thought life and tell them what they're allowed to say and think, and it's just nuts, But anyway, let's kind of, let's transition away from politics, because that's not why we're essentially connecting. But
Okay.
It's interesting nonetheless. Atheism. Let's talk about atheism, because I find the position of atheism absolutely fascinating. I really do.
And I was kind of trolling you the other day on Twitter about, you sound like you're right there.
Oh no, I know. Look, I've been told
You're right at the cusp.
Most mainstream Christianity doesn't want me either. But anyway, I find it fascinating. I really do, and I don't even know if I can articulate why. As I've said, well, I mean, if you want to get offensive, I mean, Milo said on my podcast that he's read studies to show that there's a correlation between atheism and autism. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I don't find that offensive. I just find it wrong. I mean,
well, he claims to have studies. So.
I mean, here's the thing: like, if and a lot of what Milo said, I could get behind. I mean, there were times when he was talking where I was laughing my ass off because there were things that I thought that, they never dawned on me, or I just never said them, or I never had the opportunity to have that conversation. He did kind of go off the rails for me a little bit when he went to the whole, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what it was, like atheists are all depressed, miserable beings. Because I'm certainly not. But, here's the thing. Anytime somebody says, I found a study, I am more than willing to concede that study might be onto something.
Yeah.
Just show it to me.
Yeah, no, I think I might actually ask him for it.
That'd be beautiful. I'd love to actually take a look at it.
Yeah.
Because there are a great many things that can mean, but for the practical purpose.
I mean, look, here's what I would say. And I would be interested in your thoughts on this. So, I do a sort of a comedy style podcast with a friend of mine. We call it Responding to Stuff. It's just like we're just talking absolute nonsense. It's horseshit, but it's just fun. And long story short, I made a Twitter account for this podcast, and we were just like trolling and being idiots and having fun. And I'm
going to give you a chance to plug it. What's the Twitter handle?
No. Well, here's the deal. I actually shut it. I shut it down because I had too much. I had too much social media going on, and it was just, it was getting a bit over the top. But anyway, within 24 hours of having this Twitter account live, I was blocked by Ricky Gervais.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would imagine that's hard to do.
Well, it's not. So what I did, and I made this piss take video about it called Dear Atheists, so it was quite funny. And what so here's the deal. So Ricky Gervais is an atheist. That's not a secret. He goes on these rants sometimes about so he kind of has three modes, right? He's kind of in comedy mode where he's actually kind of being funny and he's not taking himself too seriously. He's got his animal activist mode where he's posting pictures of dead animals and saying, hey, we should all give a shit about this. And then he's got his like pretentious, I'm an atheist and you guys are all idiots mode. And when he gets into that mode, he's not funny anymore, in my opinion. It's not offensive. He just stops being funny. Like, so he tweeted...
I think that might be more of an issue of target audience than anything else. But go on.
What do you mean by that?
Because I think I know some of the tweets you're talking about. And as an atheist, I look at him and go, all right, that shit's funny.
Yeah, but that's my point, though. It's too easy. It's like a whole bunch of atheists laughing at theists. I mean, come on, really? Like... It's just too anodyne and safe. It's just boring, quite honestly.
And it does nothing for anybody other than some cheap laughs. I mean, to be completely honest.
So he tweeted something along the lines of this stupid thing where he was going, a moose lives in my wardrobe, and if you don't believe me, you're hateful and you're a bigot. And I'm going, okay, that's good. That's the guy that wrote The Office, first of all. That's incredible. That's just crazy. And so I tweeted him. I'd been reading some of Richard Dawkins' tweets at the time, and this was the kicker. So this is what got me blocked by Ricky Gervais. I simply tweeted him and I said, Ricky Gervais, Richard Dawkins' tweets are funnier than yours at the moment. Please address this. And it was...
That's awesome.
Yeah, see who's the funny one, you know? So, see, I've got nothing to lose. I don't give a shit. Whatever. I'm just some random fat guy in New Zealand who believes in Jesus, you know? So, I heartfelt, there was a sincere message. I was like, please sort this out because I can't believe how boring and anodyne you're being. And that he blocked me. And so here's what he did. It was so funny. So he tweeted... Afterwards, after he blocked me, he tweeted to say, I just had to block 2 people because they were being annoying and clearly wanting a retweet. That's what he said.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, what the heck? And I went back about 20 minutes later and that tweet was gone. And I was like...
The one that he put up.
The tweet that he sent out to say that he'd blocked 2 people was deleted.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I was racking my brain going, what just happened? Like, I bothered a multi-millionaire comedian enough for him to go to my profile and click block, you know? I was like, that's insane to me.
So, I'm of two minds. I'm of two minds on this. One is, if you're going to put yourself out into the public sphere as a celebrity and make statements, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, you should deal with the fallout from those statements. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure at the end of the day, Ricky Gervais is just another living, breathing human being that gets pissed off by
of course
on the internet.
Oh, come on. Like, look,
but the thing is,
such a boring response. I get that. Of course he's just a human. Nobody's arguing that. But it's so incredible to me that somebody who'll stand up on the Golden Globes 4 times and eviscerate and annihilate the credibility of these, incredibly wealthy, famous people would just snap over that.
Well, but he did it with weeks of preparation. I mean...
What, blocking me?
No, the Golden Globe. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as if you read... It's kind of a running joke out here, if you want to see the worst bits of humanity... you don't go to a prison or you don't go to an emergency room or something like that. You go to the comment section of a newspaper's website, and it's probably kind of the same thing. I mean, he probably...
I was going to say you talk to an atheist.
Right. The internet's a fickle place when it comes to some stuff like that. Maybe he just deleted it because he figured, it's not worth the bullshit. He's already blocked. I've been guilty of that myself.
It's a bit drama queen though, isn't it?
What's that?
It's a bit drama queen.
Yeah, it is.
It's just incredible.
It is.
And I make no apologies. I clearly talk about this every time I get an opportunity because I want him to hear about this.
Well, it's funny because I've heard you talk on, well, not talk, but type on my Periscope when we first met. I've heard the story here, and I've listened to a couple of your podcasts in preparation for this. And that story comes up quite a bit. So yeah, you do kind of shameless.
Of course, I make no apologies for that. I don't care. I know that people are going to go.
But let me just give you. I am not a social media guy at all. I mean, part of my work is social media related for another company, but that's not as far as like my.
I will talk about Ricky Gervais until I get him on my podcast.
Eventually, Mark, we're going to stop giving a fuck.
What's that?
We're going to stop giving a fuck after a while. It's like, another episode of the Ricky Gervais cast with Mark Fitzgerald.
No. Yeah, no, it's too boring. He's too boring to talk about. It's fine. No, and it's funny because I was a diehard fan. I've spent so much money on his merchandise, I can't even tell you. I'm not, I'm genuinely... I'm not coming from a place of offense. I'm genuinely a disillusioned fan.
Never meet your heroes.
Yeah, totally. Or tweet them.
Right. At least you can get a celebrity to recognize your tweets. I've never been able.
Absolutely. So where do we go from here? So yeah, I mean, it does kind of speak to the point of atheists being a little bit thin-skinned, but maybe that's a comedian thing too.
Well, and I think anybody's going to be a little bit thin-skinned. And, I can't remember if it was you or Milo that made that comment on the podcast that I listened to about atheists being thin-skinned, but it kind of made me chuckle a little bit because, there's a lot of people out here, especially the dynamic of religious versus non-religious in this country, I think is kind of coming to a head.
Yeah.
And, you made one of you two, I can't remember if it was you or Milo specifically, made the thin-skinned comment. And what immediately popped into my head was the Fox News rally cry of Christian persecution and the war on Christmas. I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's
we're thin-skinned.
Starbucks. Here's the deal, though. I think I made two kind of videos about this on YouTube. One of them, you may have seen. I don't know if you listened. I did a whole video about are atheists thin-skinned.
You tweeted me the link to the YouTube.
Yeah, but then I actually made a follow-up one, basically posing the question: is faith a cover-up for fear?
Absolutely.
Right? So you say absolutely.
Absolutely, I did hear that. Yes, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, sure.
But absolutely, it is.
So I'm genuinely interested in having the conversation. I don't want to just land on one position. So as I say, I wouldn't be the kind of person that would just throw the label back at Christians and say, well, you're thin-skinned as well. I don't think they are. I think that what their issue is more fear-based.
Maybe. And again, this might be a New Zealand, U.S. thing. There is definitely a movement in this country to secularize the way things are done. And obviously, as an atheist, I can get behind that 110%. What boggles my mind is that even a Christian should be able to get behind that 110%, even a fundamentalist Christian, because what people fail to realize, at least in my mind, is, Christians in the U.S. have kind of had carte blanche because they were the majority. Not necessarily even because America is a Christian country. In my opinion, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it was not founded to be a specifically Christian country. It was founded to be a secular country, and it just so happened that the majority of people here happen to be Christian. And people kind of want to keep the idea that, we are a Christian nation and we should have some kind of deference in a political sense to Christianity. What they fail to realize is there are other countries that do the same thing with other religions, and we call them our enemies. Yeah. And the other thing is, if you have a framework of a nation that kind of already is prepared to give some kind of deference, or dare I say privilege, to one faith over another, or no faith, the only reason that preference or privilege would lie with Christianity is because it's the majority. If you see an influx of, let's say, Muslims in the U.S., where they become the majority, do you really want that system of government that allows some kind of preferential treatment to fall to them? Especially, and I asked that question to the fundamentalist Christians who are devoutly anti-Islam.
Yeah. Well, I was going to bring that point up to jump in, I guess. I don't think in the sort of climate that we live in this world currently, I don't think that atheists and Christians are really, on that different of a page in regards to values.
I would say that for the majority, and maybe sometimes silent majority, you're probably right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's always the crazies on the left and the crazies on the right. That's what it seems to me is going on, is you've got these two conversations, these people essentially yelling over the top of each other, and this silent majority in the middle going, we just want to live our normal suburban lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, me personally, at least, I really have no problem with people being religious. A lot of times you get I would say maybe I am anti-religious in as far as, I don't think that organized religion has necessarily been beneficial to mankind.
Then why are you an atheist?
I don't understand how the two are related.
It's like a religion in of itself, isn't it?
It's the lack of religion. The only thing atheist has in common with other atheists
I joke when I say that. I think it... Well, no, here's what I've said about atheism. Atheism is not a religion. As I said this to Milo again, to bring up his name. I said this to him, was that atheism is not a religion, but in its effort and focus to deconstruct religion, it ends up mimicking and emulating it. It's that whole saying. I always like to say, you become what you behold.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess in the
You've
respect
got atheist books, you've got speakers, you've got conferences, you've got everything. I mean, I grew up in the evangelical world where we had Christian camps and conferences and speakers and books, and you see exactly the same thing modeled.
well, and I would say maybe it is the same thing in the respect that, let's say, me, for instance, I am clearly a human being because I have
I don't know about
opposable
that.
thumbs and I'm, talking to you on Skype. But if I wanted to go, let's say, hunt a deer, I would go out into the woods, with my rifle in camouflage, drenched in deer piss, making deer noises, doing deer things.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not because I want to try to become a deer. It's because I'm trying to get to that deer. And if we want to have the discussion about, religion and its validity and, I don't necessarily believe in as far as my personal, choice of atheism, that I should go out there and try to convert people to atheism.
Yeah.
But I'm going to put myself out there as an atheist because people, they have questions or maybe they want to move out of their faith and they've already resigned themselves to the fact that they don't believe and they don't know what it's like to be without. And I want to be that resource for people.
Okay,
So it's not that I'm trying to be a religion because I want to be a religion. But if we're going to have the discussions in the sphere of religion, then you kind of have to hit that audience where they live. It's the same thing with hunting.
So Mark, let me ask you some incredibly stupid questions. Is atheism logical?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
Yes.
why is it logical in your opinion?
And I can only speak for myself, so keep that in mind. But
That's why I said your opinion.
yeah, people try to take an answer and then extrapolate, but you're not trying to do that, and I give you credit. For me, it's logical in the respect that I am an atheist because I do not have evidence to convince me that there is a God.
Okay.
And that's where I kind of use the logic. Faith, people say it's belief in the absence of evidence. To me, that is not a logical position to hold.
Wait, who says that's what faith is? People of faith or outside of faith?
I've heard it from both. But again,
Because I don't think I wouldn't define
set.
faith as that at all.
Yeah, I've got a very, very good friend of mine named David that lives in the same area, which is why I asked if your cohort was possibly that guy, who is an evangelical fundamentalist Christian. And we don't get along on a lot of things, but we have, these discussions all the time. And, that was, there's no evidence, so you believe it, and that's why it's called faith.
Okay, another stupid question. And this is genuinely a question I've had for a long time. What would evidence even look like to you?
So let's start at the grand, most unobtainable end of the spectrum, right? If you believe that, and not everybody believes that the Bible's literal, but a fair amount do. But so let's start at like I said, this is why it's the grand, unobtainable spectrum. If you do have an all-powerful, all-knowing God who was capable of creating the earth in 6 days, making donkeys talk, and creating people out of dirt and ribs, it would not be that difficult for him to ring my doorbell.
Ah, okay. Okay.
That's the far end. But let's just say, there's the old argument of, well, science can't prove God because, one's supernatural, which is by definition out of the realm of science. I don't necessarily know if I buy that line of logic, because if there is a creator who's powerful enough to cause us to come into existence, created us in his image, on and on and on, all the things that, people associate with a God. At some point, the scientific community is going to run into things that, not things that they just don't know the answer to, because that's how science works, but they're eventually going to come down to, this is overly simplistic and somewhat sarcastic, but you kind of get where I'm going. Like, there will be one day a test tube full of Jesus. We figured it out. Here is the Jesus. Something like that. What's the evidence going to look like? I honestly don't know. That's a hard question to answer.
Well, it's a ridiculous question, really.
You're asking me to define a hypothetical that...
Well, you've rejected a hypothetical, though. This is what I find interesting, because you set up a premise of a God that you don't believe in. You set some rules, right? you said, a God that, made the world in 6 days, created us from dust, blah, blah, blah. So you have some positives that you're rejecting. Right?
Well, and as far as those positives, the positives of, creation and a literal Genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I reject that completely out of hand. I mean, I have no
absolutely,
problem
but not.
But if I'm correct, so do you, don't you?
Well, that's what I was about to say. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say no. I mean, I don't even give that view of God enough credibility to reject it. I don't see God like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about turning mythology into scientific deconstruction, and I think that I don't think Genesis is a science book.
No, and I would hope you don't.
I don't think it intended itself to be. I don't think that the Bible was written literally by God and beamed out of the sky,
like Book of Mormon style. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we're dealing with history. I think we're dealing. I mean, look, let's go on a premise we can both agree on. The Bible exists, correct?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go there. So what is it? What is this crazy book that we're still talking about thousands of years later? What even is it?
I thought about this a lot, and for me, the purpose, the process of refinement and translation and, reappropriating and basically selection by committee that the Bible's gone through, for me, makes it so much touched by the hands of man, if you will, that if there was any divinity to it, it has long been filtered out. And, I don't look at it as a work of, like the literal word of God, obviously, because I don't believe that there's, a God.
Well, it's funny. I'm hoping to connect with a guy, Peter Rollins, in this week, actually, for the podcast. He's an Irish philosopher, theologian kind of guy. Very interesting. He's a storyteller and very, very articulate, very intelligent, and very interesting and compelling. And he kind of argues... He goes with the same premise that you just put out, which was the Bible's been sort of filtered and touched by human hands, etc., etc. But he sort of argues the opposite point because of that reality. And he sort of says, well, he kind of describes it like a trauma. You've got say the four Gospels. You've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and these competing narratives. So you've got this kind of this happened, and then one book will go into more detail on certain things and less on others, and he sort of says, well, if you come across somebody who's been through some kind of traumatic event and they can articulate a time frame and say, this is what happened at 10 past 12 and blah, 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 and, all detailed and airtight. He said, well, that wouldn't indicate that they were telling the truth. That would tend to indicate more of a fabrication, right? Because it's such a rehearsed narrative. But when you go through it, and I'm not talking specifically about the Bible here, I'm saying any kind of traumatic event, when you're recounting it, it's going to be chaotic.
Well, and it's been said for quite a while that the absolute worst, least reliable testimony in court is eyewitness testimony. And it's, I think, for exactly the same reason that you just brought up. I mean, everybody's going to, even if there was no trauma, everybody's going to perceive things differently.
Well, exactly. So how do we, in a general, and I'm no historian, let's not go too deep into these things, but how do you determine any kind of historical event?
Well, I think when it comes to things that are more recent in our history, you're going to have possibly more well-documented sources because, the ability to write and record things was much more prevalent throughout the population than it was.
But aren't there more problematic things too? I mean, isn't the age of technology given us the ability to Photoshop and to edit and to kind of fabricate more?
Well, yeah, but that's not even kind of where I'm going with that. I mean, if you want to talk about the early days of the printing press or, back in a period of time where, more of your population knew how to read and write than didn't, so we might have the very same thing. We might have a written account of an event or a series of events, but instead of having 4 or 5, we might have 500 or 600, and have that 500 or 600, we can look at it and, analyze some war or conflict because all of them are going to share certain common elements that we would deduce as being the truth. The Bible, and the thing about the Bible, for me at least, is, do we necessarily know the intentions of the people that wrote the early parts of it? I mean, like you could look at the Old Testament as, early religious writings or early, some people look at it as early history. But what if, let's say we developed a time machine and went back and, looked at when the Bible was originally written, and we saw a bunch of old goat herders hanging out in the cave doing, tripping out after they ate some mushrooms that they found that, turned out to be, psychoactive drugs. And for some reason that just stuck around for 2,000 years and it was nothing more than some goat herder's pipe dream.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden people are building
a paper. It speaks to the value of drugs.
Yeah, well, and it speaks to the value of the, I look at the Bible as much of a record of God as a Spider-Man comic is the record of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? We get into this rhetoric where, you start kind of spouting off this, scripted, the flying spaghetti monster and atheists don't eat babies and, all this kind of craziness. This just gets ridiculous. Do you know what I mean?
I get what you're saying. I mean...
Well, it becomes a non-conversation.
I think it ultimately boils down to what is trying to be accomplished during the conversation.
Yes, I'm glad you said this. Sorry to get excited there. I'm glad you said this because this is exactly what I wanted to transition into. Because I don't want this conversation to be about what we believe. I'm not going to sit here and try and prove God to you because I can't. But I'm interested in the why. Why do we believe what we believe? Why do I believe in God? Let me put myself on trial before I throw anything at you. Why do I have this impulse to believe in the divine? Why can't I seem to let this go? And this is a legitimate question that I'm asking throughout my podcast. Is why do I hold on to this story? Why does it still hold value to me? Why is these concepts of grace and forgiveness and compassion and, why do these compel me? Right? So I'm curious to ask, from your perspective, and I don't want to homogenize and label you as this generic atheist. You're a human being with dignity and your own, personality and thoughts and experiences. So why do you value the position of atheism, or why do you not why do you believe it as in what's your evidence, but why do you think you hold to it?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's evidence-based, and for no other explanation than I am an evidence-based kind of guy. That's just the way that my mind has worked.
Evidence is overrated.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like you brought up in one of your responses in the YouTube audio clip you sent me was, there is a certain element of fear in faith, and I personally don't feel that fear should be a reason you believe something. To me, that's kind of a step above coercion. I mean, that's basically...
Okay.
I see too many parallels between that and why a woman would stay with an abusive husband.
Yeah. Absolutely. I guess I'd like you to go... I guess I want to wind down here because, we've been talking for a while now. But if I want to give you a bit of a soapbox here. So if you could say one kind of core message to religious people about their position, about their lives, about why they do what they do, what would it be? What would you say to us crazy, deluded people who can't shake these myths and fairy tales?
I think, speaking strictly for myself, and I'm sure there's a bunch of atheists out there that, I associate with that probably share this view that it maybe hasn't come up in conversation, but at the end of the day, your personal belief or your lack of belief, anything like that, I honestly couldn't care less as to what you believe and why you believe it. I go through my life, and all I ask is that I'm allowed to live my life in the way that I see fit without interference from other people. And if somebody wants to sit down and have the discussion about religion or lack of belief or science, creationism, all of that, I'm more than willing to sit down and have the conversation, if for no other reason than I enjoy it. But at the same time, I think that the way that I view the world can stand, some kind of test to where I'm not afraid to bring it up and have the conversation about it. That being said, I appreciate the people who are religious, who are more than willing to just, let me go on with my life and do whatever I want to do the best way I see fit. And, you know, as far as people's religious views go, I will do everything in my power personally to make sure that you still have the freedom to believe what you want to believe. I in no way, shape, or form have the goal of wiping religion out or making people not religious or making an environment that's not that's hostile towards religion.
Yeah.
That being said, the second somebody crosses the boundary from being a believer to using a government to legislate their particular brand of morality or their particular belief system, or, you know, indoctrinate children on the company or on the government dollar, you are going to have the fight of your life on your hands. And I will do everything in my power, politically and socially, to stop you in your tracks.
Yeah. See, this is interesting. I think this is an interesting place to close it, because this is what I found. I found this with Lucas, who's on my belief series, with the other atheists I've met on Blab and Periscope and things. It seems that the passion and the drive, you kind of summed it up there, I think. That if you come against these core values that we hold, you are going to have the fight of your life, right?
Well, and just to clarify, I don't think those core values are core values that are exclusive to atheism. I think those core values.
Well, this is the point, though, to me. And this is
genuine human values.
Yeah. So this is my, you know, I kind of frame it in a sort of a religious sense, I suppose, where I would see this desire inside of us as a divine impulse. That's how I would see it. And I know you disagree, obviously. I think, you know, as the Bible says, we are all made in the image of God. And I do believe that, meaning that we have inherent value and worth and dignity. And that's where I think that impulse comes from. And that's why I find it incredibly ironic. So, yeah, and it seems to me, what I was trying to say, it seems that the impulse to sort of fight a lot of these narratives is more of a political one than a religious one. Like you said, most people, I think, fall into the camp that you kind of articulated, right? Where it's like, you know, we really don't care. You can believe what you want. You know, atheists are not trying to, although actually let's dive into this a little bonus section. No, I just completely forgot. I do want to get your thoughts.
I was wondering when this was going to come up.
Yeah, no, I know. I completely forgot about this phenomenon of street epistemology. My goodness. What is going on? This is like a bonus segment for those who aren't completely bored out of their brain. But what the heck is going on when atheists are going on the street? Look, I was a street preacher for 5 years, man. Like, I preached heaven and hell dogmatically. But what the heck is going on in these atheist heads when they're going on the street essentially trying to convert people?
You know, you've mentioned this a couple of times. I have yet to see it. And it's kind of amazing to me.
It's mind-blowing.
I've yet to see it in my daily life, which is weird because I live in Arizona, which is a pretty conservative, therefore pretty Christian area.
Yeah.
So, you know, you would expect that you would see maybe some social pushback. But at the same time, I went to a university where the people that did what, you know, you used to do, and maybe some more offensive and, you know, inhumane than what you used to do, were not uncommon. I mean, street preachers all over the place. Some were, you know, the kind that like set up a little prayer tent and, you know, or handed out little copies of the New Testament. And others were the fire and brimstone, your dress is too short, you're a whore, you're going to hell.
I've been told that many times.
And your dress is too short?
Yeah.
Oh.
That was a joke. See, you didn't even... Oh, never mind.
That's because atheists have no sense of humor.
Come on.
But I've never seen anybody from the other side go out and do that. The most that I've ever seen, and I got to give this guy credit, was there was a guy on our campus at one particular point in time who was particularly hostile and particularly maybe on the verge of violence. And this guy, I mean, he would go out and like run after women that he deemed were too slutty. I mean, he crossed the line from religion to maybe a legitimate public threat, you know. And this other student on campus, I got to give him all the credit in the world. He would stand next to him and try to just out-volume him while reading from a cookbook. And it was just to shut him up and to allow people to go through their day. And I think, honestly, this guy's point was, you know, he's thinking, okay, this street preacher is going to punch somebody.
Oh, look,
I would
see
rather
yelling
him
in that.
punch me than a 90-pound,
Yeah.
woman who's just trying to get to class. Like, I got to get all the credit in the world for that.
I'm with you on that. I'm totally with you on that. I'm with the cookbook guy. Absolutely. But this is not what's happening. This street epistemology is atheists deliberately approaching random people going about their day and trying to, I don't want to say convert because they get pissed off when I say convert, but they're trying to challenge them and go, tell me why you believe what you believe. And it's just insane.
Oh, I don't think that's a conversion. I don't think that's an attempt at conversion. What I look at that as is you have a belief system. You go out and you make a statement. Now defend it.
Let's be clear, though. You haven't seen this, right? You said that yourself.
No, I'm going based solely on what you're telling me.
So, yeah, I mean, I wish that you kind of had seen it, but actually, I wish I could unsee it. But it's cringeworthy. It's just unreal. I don't understand the impulse from a truly atheist perspective to do that. I don't get it.
Are you familiar with Penn Jillette?
Absolutely.
Okay. He is one of my absolute personal heroes when it comes to a certain extent, something's political, but, social, moral, and, religious issues. And the one thing that he said that really kind of turned around the way I thought about this was, I used to get really annoyed when people would do the shit that you did, right? Going out into the street and trying to preach.
I know what you're going to say. He values it. I've heard him talk about this, where he says, well, at least you're living out your convictions, right?
Well, into a little more of a, extent, he goes on and says, if you are convinced absolutely beyond a reasonable doubt in an unshakable way that you found the path to everlasting life and happiness, it would be amoral for you not to share that.
Yeah, but what the heck have atheists found that they're so compelled to tell us about?
Well, that's kind of, it's kind of where I'm going with this. Number one, I don't necessarily, having heard that, it kind of changed my opinion to where, I wasn't necessarily annoyed with these people. But, I will stop and talk to them and have a conversation. And, hey, I'll ask them questions. And, if I'm a firm believer, if you have a premise that you're putting out there, to be able to defend it. But at the same time, okay, so you're asking what possible motivation does an atheist have to do something along those lines?
What's their everlasting
if there's no religion?
Gospel?
Oh, it's not an everlasting life gospel. It's very simple, but you hit the nail on the head when you put that thing up on YouTube where you said that, faith has a component of fear.
Yeah.
And if I, as an atheist, believe that the only life I have is the one on this earth right now,
then you'd waste it trying to bother other people.
Well, no. Why would I chose, I guess would be the wrong word, but I came to the conclusion that I don't have to live in fear of a deity or the next life.
So the good news is, the gospel is you don't have to be afraid.
You're helping people not live in fear and enjoy the time they have on this earth.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it comes down to. Or maybe they're just assholes that like to cause conflict. I mean, that could be it too.
No, this is the thing. They're not. I know some of these people. They're nice people, and I have to say this. They are genuinely nice people. Lucas, who's on my, belief series as well, he does this stuff, right? So they're nice people. They're genuinely authentic people for the most part. But the thing is, so I think what you're kind of saying is that the gospel of atheism, essentially, if we could say it like that, is you don't have to be afraid anymore. You can live, right? But my issue with it is an atheist is not, it's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely that an atheist is going to really set someone free from the matrix of religion.
You would be surprised.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I know it does happen.
And I don't think that, I mean, let's be honest. Somebody knocking on my door to share an issue of the Watchtower magazine isn't going to make me turn into a Jehovah's Witness. So, I mean, the same could be said both ways. I think if you're going to make a decision to follow one of those directions, there's already some groundwork that's been laid. But I think the big thing is, and especially in the U.S., and it goes back to the Facebook group I was a member, I was telling you about being a member of. The reason it's so tightly vetted is there are places in this country where if you come out as an atheist, your family may disown you, you may lose your job, and you might have to move because it is so devoutly religious in pockets of this country. So you have somebody who's struggling with their faith, or maybe past the point of struggling, and says, okay, you know what? I don't believe in any of this. I don't have any reason to believe in any of this. just maybe that pushy atheist is just serving the purpose of saying, hey, listen, dude, regardless of whether or not you're out in public, you're not alone in this.
Yeah, it's a solidarity thing. I get that. I can appreciate that to a huge extent. It's just bizarre to me. I don't think, and I've said this for a long time, if I was going to be a quote-unquote atheist, first of all, I wouldn't label myself as such. I would just get the fuck on with my life, quite honestly.
Why wouldn't you label yourself?
Because it's absurd. It's absurd. If this life was all I had, why would I need a label?
I can see your point.
Why would I need a label?
Your point.
I get this.
And I think it depends on your political stance as well.
It's hugely political, and I'm glad we touched on politics earlier, because I think it is hugely political. And here's my issue, and I need to say this to all these lovely street epistemologists out there who probably will listen to me because I'm getting a reputation, but they are genuine people. Well, they are genuine to a point. Here's where I think they're disingenuous. They're disingenuous as hell, and I've been explicit about this. It's going up to... I'm not against the questions. I'm not against being challenged. I'm not threatened. I'm not offended by the questioning. What annoys me to no end is the pretentiousness of it. Because what they do, just to sum it up, and you can verify this by checking it out yourself, obviously, but they essentially go up to people and they don't admit their bias. So they go, hey, I'm just a random generic person, and I just want to talk to you about why you believe what you believe, right? The epistemology of your belief. They don't put any of their own cards on the table. It's quite, and I'll say this is the first time I've said this on record, but to me, it's quite honestly cowardice. It's a cowardice thing to do, because you're not putting any of your own cards on the table. You're not being anywhere remotely honest about your position, and you're just challenging random people about the shit they believe. It's unbelievable. Like, it's nuts, quite honestly.
Well, I get where you're coming from, and I will say
I appreciate that I'm putting you on the spot.
I've had Christians do the same thing to me.
Yeah, but this is
my favorite one is, hey, I'm doing a survey for a class.
Yeah, we talked about. No, it's funny you say that. So I talked to a guy, Doug Padgett. He's an author. He's part of what's called the Emergent sort of church. I had him and Lucas and I did a three-way sort of podcast together on the Belief Series, episode 4, I believe. Just shameless plug. No, Doug is great. So he brought up the exact point you just did. He said, well, Christians have done the same thing, and I've been a part of that, and let's just do a survey. Look, I'm with you. But again, mocking somebody else's worst argument certainly does not justify your best one. Right?
I'm not sure where you're getting at. Mocking somebody's...
Well, to just simply go, what you're essentially saying is, well, they do it too.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it doesn't make it any better.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, so I mean, here's one of the thoughts that Doug had, and again, Doug was in the same boat as you. He hadn't seen any of this. He was only going by, sort of Lucas's description of it and my own thoughts on it. But he came out with an idea, a sort of a concept that I never thought of. He essentially said the same as what I did, which is the questioning is fine, but it's the premise, right? And he sort of made this really subtle analogy between this whole conversation around consent, right? When you're saying, like, and to do with, sexual encounters, when you're engaging with someone, and, how important it is to kind of get consent to go to that next step, right? And he was kind of essentially saying, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he's essentially saying, you're raping someone's intellect, right? Like, you're just kind of sidelining them and just bamboozling them with all these questions.
So wait a second. What you're saying is the world would be a better place if we just taught atheists not to rape?
Oh, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Stop raping our minds.
I'm kind of wondering, though, because, again, like you pointed out, I have no idea about any of this. I've never seen it done in practice. I've seen the maneuvers done from a Christian perspective. Yeah. And I'm not trying to say, well, one side does it,
it's the same thing in reverse. Just imagine that. It's atheist evangelism.
Yeah. But I'm kind of wondering how many people, and this is mostly academic. I mean, it's not an answer I'll ever get a question I'll ever get an answer to, but I'm kind of wondering how many people go through their daily lives being raised in a religion or whatever belief system, and then walking down the street one day outside of a grocery store and somebody goes, "Hey, why do you believe that?" I wonder for how many people that's the first time they ever sat and thought about that question.
Well, yeah, okay. I don't know where you're going with it at all, to be honest.
I mean, not really anywhere, but I mean, maybe that's the point. I mean, you go through your life going through the motions of a religion, maybe what it takes for you to find, what, in my opinion, what you ultimately believe in, landing there is kind of going to be what ultimately makes you happy. So maybe you just never had maybe if you grew up in a church environment surrounded by people of the same faith, and practice the same thing, maybe you just never had that question.
I want to end this here, and I want to end it as offensively as possible. The reason I'm so turned off atheism is because, as I said earlier, it looks exactly like the thing that I'm trying so hard to get away from, to be quite
What
blunt.
are you trying to get away from? I'm trying to understand your position.
This could open up a whole nother. Maybe let's leave the listeners there. I'll stop recording here. Let's do like a part 2 maybe.
Okay.
What is Mark trying to? Because